and monitor contractual obligations on ServiceNow. So before I start today's webinar, there are just a couple of housekeeping items which I'd like to cover. Starting with, we have tried to keep this webinar a bit interactive, wherein there will be a couple of polls which we'll be conducting so that we are able to understand you better and your challenges. There will be a couple of Q&A sessions which will be going on, and as we'll be doing the demo. So while during the demo, if you have any questions, so feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat box in the Zoom webinar interface. And apart from that, don't forget to follow us on our LinkedIn channel and our other social media channels, wherein we are showcasing a lot of new content about the products which we create on ServiceNow. And lastly, if we miss something out, you can always reach out to us to contact@aavenir.com. So with that, I would like to introduce today's presenters, starting with Russell, who heads the key account management at Aavenir. And he focuses on helping customers to get the best of contract management, project management, quote to cash, and source to pay solutions. With Russell, we also have Vikram, who is the product expert who brings in 22 years of specialization in areas like contract lifecycle management, obligation management, RFX management, AP automation, and configure price to quote type of solutions. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Russell to start the webinar. Russell, over to you.
Thanks, Matty. So today's topic is about managing contractual obligations. I think perhaps a good place to start would be really outlining the concept and providing a bit of insight to help you think about where your organization is at today in this respect. So traditionally, contracts are managed by transactional compliance and also by regulatory compliance. An example of those would be like a payment term, for instance. A payment term is an example of a transactional compliance. And updating a certificate of insurance would be an example of a regulatory compliance in a contract. And really achieving compliance across all of the different demands of the agreement, that really is kind of the nirvana state. But very few organizations could actually achieve a well-rounded compliance strategy simply because the technology wasn't there, right? Contracts, they're long. They're complex documents full of complex language. Some of them can be 50, 100 pages long. Even the process of identifying all of the compliance demands of a single contract can be a pretty major undertaking. And, this gap in the compliance strategy creates a lot of risk for organizations. It also has a negative impact on the company's bottom line as well. So fortunately, in the modern landscape, both types of compliance can be considered together as obligations, and modern technology allows extracting these terms to help drive a well-rounded and automated compliance strategy. So just a bit of background about obligations and contract compliance. What we're looking at on the screen here is what we call a maturity model, and you can think about this as kind of a spectrum of the maturity of your strategy. So have a look at this and ask yourself, where are you at today with regard to your obligation management strategy? I would say the core of obligation management is simply having a repository, one place where all of your agreements are filed. You might have some metadata, who's the vendor, who is the customer, what's the value, maybe filed and by business unit. Really just having one spot where you can go to find all of your contracts is the core. Beyond that, we start to get into more of proactive obligation management, right? Still usually done manually, but actually going about the process of managing the obligations proactively, identifying them, tracking them in some capacity. Usually that's on a spreadsheet. The next layer of maturity is really starting to leverage more of the modern technology to drive automation and efficiency. A lot of this automation and efficiency is achieved on the front end, actually identifying and extracting obligations. We're going to talk a lot about that today. And the end state really is having an end-to-end solution to help drive to help drive the management of your contract obligations 100% of the time. And you can think about this this way. In a normal repository, you have a contract record. Like I said, you might have some data about that contract. With a solution like this, not only do you have the contract record, you've got associated obligation records as well that are tied back to that contract and can be delegated and assigned to people for ownership to make sure they're actually being completed. So that's going to take us to our first poll, thinking about the maturity matrix that we just had a look at. Where do you fall today? How is your organization doing when it comes to obligation management? Immature, very mature, usually it's somewhere in between. Don't be bashful if it's not a very mature reality right now, because many organizations just simply don't have a great strategy for this. So let's give everybody a moment to gather the feedback. All right, results should be coming in just about any second now. And not surprising to me at all, the vast majority of the viewers today are in the core contract repository stage of maturity. Only a handful are actually doing a proactive obligation tracking strategy. So again, that's very typical, and we're going to talk about some ways that we can help you achieve a more proactive strategy and really offer some automation opportunities as well. So Aavenir Obligationflow is a solution built on the ServiceNow platform, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the platform and how valuable that is to the strategy and to the solution here. But let's talk first about the actual steps of the process and how we help you achieve this nirvana state of contract compliance. It all starts with importing your agreements onto the platform. Now, we can support any contract from any system. All you need to get started here is a digital copy of your contract. Once the contract has been imported, our technology is actually going to scan the agreement, and we have an AI-based extraction process that will read the contract, identify all of the obligations in that contract, and present them to you. Once that's done, the fulfillment process begins. You can assign these different obligations out to different folks or different business units to be fulfilled. And ultimately, again, the end state here is compliance. We offer you reports and dashboards, analytics, automated reminders, everything you really need to help you achieve a high degree of contract compliance and the certainty of knowing that you're not letting things slip through the cracks. A great way to consider this is that our AI technology really manages the front end of the process, which you're going to see later today in the demonstration. And we leverage workflows on the ServiceNow platform and task delivery to manage the back end of the process. So, as we just outlined a moment ago, Obligationflow can work with contracts from any platform. However, there is significant value in having a single platform to manage both the contract lifecycle and the ongoing compliance strategy after the agreement's been signed. Many solutions focus mostly on the contract execution, but as any legal team will tell you, there's a lot of work to be done after the contract is signed. I mean, really, that's when the party starts, right? That's when everybody is actually on the hook for all of the things that you've been negotiating. Adding the execution and compliance solutions together creates an end-to-end sort of cradle-to-grave outcome for every single one of your agreements. This is a unique value proposition that Aavenir has to offer, a single source of truth that can centralize not only the lifecycle of the agreement, but to ensure regulatory and transactional compliance throughout the entire contract term. And important to note, either of these solutions can stand alone. You don't need one to have the other, but I think you will find that they are natural complements to one another and that the value can really grow exponentially when you complete your entire strategy on one platform. Traditionally, the life cycle and the compliance strategy are managed very manually, managed offline, a lot of Microsoft Word, email-based manual activities. Not only is this inefficient, it leaves your legal team, your risk and compliance team without any real insight that they can take action on, right? So having a single system for both the life cycle and compliance transforms your agreement management strategy into a valuable source of rich data points that really they span your entire enterprise, right? I mean, after all, every part of the business relies on their contracts to define their operations, define their relationships, and now these agreements can be queried and leveraged to create actionable insights for your team. So I want to talk a little bit more about the platform and the solution here. It's pretty innovative. What we've decided to do, putting all of these things onto the ServiceNow platform to centralize these processes. And in the case of obligations, you upload your contract onto Aavenir. As we discussed earlier, our proprietary AI technology scans the documents, identifies obligations, puts them onto an obligation board that's associated with your contract. And then we use the ServiceNow platform as really the underpinning technology. We use that to drive automation, to assign tasks, to create analytics and reports, to send reminders to people. Because, obligations don't just happen immediately. Some contracts are multi-year in term and have obligations that need to be fulfilled on an annual basis. Having a single system to proactively drive all of these things adds a lot of value and really reduces a lot of risk when it comes to your contract management strategy. So that takes us to poll number 2. What type of obligations are you most frequently tracking? I mean, some of these are, I think, going to be what you would expect: payment obligations, insurance obligations, but there's really a lot to this. And I think as you read through the list, you'll start to get an understanding of the scope of what obligations really encompasses. It's quite a bit.
So Russell, we'll just give a couple of seconds. A lot of responses are coming in.
Excellent. Happy to see so much engagement from the crowd. All right, results are in. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but payment obligations are number 1. But interestingly, there's a pretty flat, even blend across the rest of the obligations that were listed. M&A obligations, unfortunately, did not get any takers. But just about everything else, about a third or up to half of the people participating identified those as regularly tracked obligations. So thank you very much for the feedback and participation and for the engagement. So let's just do a bit of a recap before we get to the demo. There are problems that you might be experiencing within your strategy here. You might be challenged by the time-consuming process of identifying obligations. You might be confused by a lack of ownership or an inability to delegate tasks and have confidence that these things will be taken care of proactively. And of course, the number one problem that really plagues just about every company in some capacity within their contract management strategy is a general lack of visibility. Just can't query the data, can't take actionable insights based on past circumstances because we just simply don't have access to the data. And we can help you with these things. And I tell you, it's a pretty unique solution. Not many things span the entire enterprise, touching both your customers and your vendors and your bottom line quite the way that contracts and obligations of contracts do. So without further ado, I will pass over the reins to Vikram to take over for the demonstration.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Russell, for setting that context. That was a marvelous job. And all right, so taking on from here, once again, quick And very warm welcome to everyone on this webinar. I truly do appreciate each one of you taking out your time and to be on this webinar with us today, allowing us the opportunity to show you the future of contractual compliance. And as you've just heard from Russell, we've built a really amazing product that helps your organization achieve very high levels of compliance and provides a great deal of visibility to the current state of compliance towards your contractual obligations in your company, in your organization. A little bit of context, typically companies end up paying penalties, late payment charges, there's legal fees for litigations, etc. And it's all because they fail to meet certain contractual obligations. You encounter scenarios where a company was entitled to certain rebates from a vendor, but that simply got missed out because someone somewhere in the operations team never realized what was agreed on the contract. Again, there are SLA slippages that occur, and those can result in companies being subjected to penalties and heavy liabilities. That's a lot of money actually that actually goes there. So according to a published research by the IACCM, the global average for all such revenue leakage is about 9%. That's pretty high. And just to take an example, in just last year globally, and this is an example, the telecom industry alone lost about 40 billion US dollars in revenue leakage, according to a survey conducted by KPMG. And this was a survey conducted across 74 operators in 46 countries. That's a lot of money lost, and which could have otherwise been used in R&D, sales, and marketing, and so on. So this highlights the importance of staying compliant, because when you're compliant to contractual obligations, there's definitely a great chance of reduction in this kind of revenue leakage. Ultimately, it's going to help your company improve cash flow. And as they say, cash is king. But I'd just like to add one more thing here, that data is the kingmaker. So it's only when you have data and you can make sense of all of that data, that's when you would really know where you stand today from a contractual compliance standpoint and what you need to do to get to a higher level of contractual compliance. And as you've already heard many times, without data, it's all just an opinion. But once you have the data, that gives you clear actionables to achieve your objectives. Let's jump right in and take a look. I'm inside Aavenir Obligationflow, and the obligations dashboard. This is your one-stop point that tells you all you need to know about the state of contractual compliance in your organization. Now, every organization, depending upon the nature of its business, tends to have more of certain types of obligations. Software vendors may have more of SLAs and data protection. Similarly, financial organizations may have more of confidentiality and disclosure obligations, and so on. But this knowledge helps organizations to strengthen its capability to comply by, say, for example, adding more people in those specific functions and departments, or automating certain processes in those areas. And this is also going to change over time, because as organizations diversify its business, your major obligations are likely to change over time. So this graph, in this dashboard, this graph, the obligations by category, instantly tells you which are your most frequently encountered obligations in your organization. And in this example, for example, it's the service level management, SLA obligations, data protection, and there's payment obligations. So these are the most frequently encountered obligations in this particular example. And with this information, what happens is it enables your organization to take strategic decisions as to, for example, how does it get to be more compliant by design, say, for example, by adding more staff, by bringing process automation, bringing new technology, and so on. So, for example, if SLA, and if one of the SLAs, such as uptime, is one of the biggest SLAs that your company wants to ensure, then you might want to consider investing in a reliable and reputed data center to host your services off. Likewise, if payments is one of your major obligations, you might want to consider investing in a software technology that helps you automate your accounts payable process. So this graph alone gives you a lot of strategic information towards helping your organization get more compliant. All right, so two big questions with regards to compliance in general is, any organization would ask this: where do we stand today with regards to contractual compliance? And what do we need to do to get to a higher level of compliance? And generally, this question is asked by the senior leaders in your organization, could be the C-suite. And so let's imagine that at the end of the quarter, your CFO wants to know the overall state of compliance across all running contracts. Now, that's not an easy report to compile. It takes a lot of manual effort and time to come up with that information. This graph, the general compliance graph, gives you that information instantly. So the green section shows you all your fulfilled obligations across all your running contracts. And so you immediately know your overall percentage of compliance. So the more green you see here, the more compliant you are to your contractual obligations. And then there's this other graph here that shows you all your obligations by category. So when you're again running up, against the end of the quarter, you want to make sure you're meeting all your compliances. This graph tells you which areas to focus on. So you've got service level management obligations, data protections, payments, audits, and so on. So all these obligations are categorized. And as once again, just like before, you want to focus on all the blue obligations because those are the ones you need to take your actions on. And once you start fulfilling those obligations, that's when you get more green. And so, as I said before, green is the new compliance. So now that your senior leaders have this information about where you stand with regards to obligation compliance today, the next point is, people need to do things to make sure that they're getting to a higher level of compliance. And so let's imagine for that purpose, the CFO sends out an email to department heads, project managers, functional heads, and lets them know that, okay, make sure that all your team members, departments, fulfill all the obligations that they own. Now, if you are one of those departmental heads or functional heads who have received that notification, how would you know who are the people in your team who have pending obligations against them, right? So we solved that problem here. So here's a graph, the obligation tasks by owner, that gives you exactly that information. So for example, you can see here, Lisa and John have pending obligations. Then there's Eric, Rob, and Vivian who have open obligations. And there's Eileen here, Jim, and Lisa who've got obligations that are work in progress. So now you know who are the people in your team, in your department, who have obligations against them. And with this information, you can now just send out an email to them saying that, okay, hey, please, take care of these obligations because we need to be more compliant at the end of the quarter. So that's done. And now let's look at it from the perspective of one of these people, say Lisa, for example, who received this notification from you. And she needs to know what are the things she needs to do in order to be more compliant, in order to fulfill those obligations. So so what we do is we break down the obligations into tasks, and every obligation has a bunch of tasks that people need to fulfill. And once those tasks are completed, the obligation overall is also, it gets fulfilled. And that's the information that Lisa sees here. This is the obligation tasks by status, where Lisa can see all her pending, open, and work in progress tasks. And again, just like before, she wants to make sure that she closes all her tasks and ultimately get more green because these are the closed and complete tasks. So in general, as a team, the more green you see across all of these graphs that you see this dashboard, that generally shows that your organization is more compliant towards contractual obligations. All right, so with that, what we just saw is just with the dashboards alone, organization is able to achieve a significant amount of visibility and the move towards that compliance. But let's change gears now. And I do know that one of the top questions on everyone's mind is, how do we know what are the obligations in a contract to begin with? Now, that's a very good question and a very important one, and also one that has traditionally never been easy to answer. I mean, you can imagine, just like Russell also talked about, your organization has just signed a new contract with a vendor or a customer, and now you need to drive that contractual engagement and comply to the obligations. So to know what your obligations are, you have to read through 50 or 100 or even more than that pages of legal language and then decipher what would possibly be your obligations that you must comply with. Now, that is not efficient. It's time consuming, it's tedious, and it's just highly error prone. So is there a way to solve that problem? So with traditional rules-based technology, that's not possible. But now and today, with the advent and advancement in artificial intelligence technology, we have made this possible and have solved that problem. And we call it the automated obligation discovery. Let's take a look. So all you do is you go to your contract. So I'm on this contract number 447, and here's where I see all information, the metadata information about the contract, who's the vendor, location, contract name, entity, and so on. And here's the actual contract document. And like Russell mentioned, that this contract in general could come from any system that you use today as a contract repository, okay? And if you move over to the right-hand side, you see this Discover Obligations button. Now, if this was that new contract that we just talked about, then identifying your contractual obligations is now just reduced to a simple button click. When you click Discover Obligations, we run our artificial intelligence model that scans this document end to end and brings up this list of obligations that you see right here. And of course, you also have the ability to add additional obligations if that was required. Let's take a look at a couple of obligations. So this one states that the vendor agrees to replace materials at no extra cost upon inspections if the quality parameters don't meet. This is a medium priority one-time obligation. Let's also take a look at one more. This one that says support side to provide a response within 2 hours for any support query raised, and this has to be audited for compliance every month. And this is a high priority monthly obligation. So now that the artificial intelligence model has extracted and identified and categorized these obligations for you, how does your staff audit these obligations for compliance? Let's take this SLA obligation as an example. Now, as we saw earlier in the dashboard, ultimately every obligation is broken down into tasks, and those tasks have task owners. So when I actually click into one of these obligations, I'll be able to see what are the underlying tasks that actually, if I were to fulfill, if I were to complete, then this obligation itself would be a fulfilled obligation. And so you can see coming up on your screen, there are 12 tasks which the system has automatically created for you, 1 per month. And that's because this was a monthly obligation. So this system creates tasks for every obligation that it identifies automatically, depending upon whether it's one time, monthly, or annual. You don't have to do anything based on no manual clicks, no manual intervention. And the advantage of tasks is that your operational staff are reminded of pending tasks through notifications, and so it helps them close their tasks on time. And as we saw earlier in the dashboard, when they close tasks, your obligation moves towards fulfillment, and ultimately your organization is moving towards a much higher level of compliance. So to wrap it up, what we have built this product on the ServiceNow platform. In fact, all our products are built natively on ServiceNow. That means you don't need to hire and train people to administer our products, like changing a workflow, creating a new notification, and so on. ServiceNow administrators can do all of that for you, and hence it saves you time as well as cost. All the data that Aavenir generates resides within ServiceNow, and hence you are absolutely guaranteed of extremely high levels of data security and privacy compliances. And last but not the least, you don't need a separate login ID and password to log into Aavenir. When you log into ServiceNow, you also automatically log in to Aavenir. So no need to remember another set of credentials. Right, thank you very much. And with that, I now hand it over back to Maddie.
Great, thank you, Vikram. And Russell, can you please share the screen? And what we'll do is we will now cover the Q&A session. So there are a couple of questions which are already coming in. So before I cover the questions, there are a couple of resources which are available on our website, and I would request you that if you want to start to manage your obligations, there are some digital resources like an RFP template and also a checklist which you can follow in order to analyze and assess whether the obligation management workflow in your current organization is up to the mark or not. And lastly, also, if you want to look at the demo, you can reach out to us directly. So let me just now take on the questions. Starting with the first question is regarding by Mahesh. So he's sharing that how do we secure the contract to be visible to other users on system? So and also, is there any way a vendor would have access to the contract, and can he see his own contracts? So I'll just repeat the question again. I think this is more around the digital workflows, and so Vikram and Russell would be the right person, but it's more on the contract visibility. So Russell or Vikram, yeah, open to you guys.
All right, so yeah, I think I'll take that. So that's a good question about, how do you control visibility to the contract? So as Russell showed in the slides earlier, we have an end-to-end vision, and we have the contract flow, which is a product that automates your contracting process and also gives you the repository, which is your centralized on-cloud repository where you have all your contracts. And that is the repository that, where you can define all of these roles and access control. So you can define criteria based on users, roles, and levels as to who can access which contracts in that repository. And the obligation flow, what we saw just now is like the next level product, which kind of, it just fits after you have signed and activated a contract. And that's when your obligations will be identified from that contract in that repository. And then the obligation flow takes on from there and helps you track and manage your obligations and compliance.
Great. Thank you, Vikram, for that. The next question is, which are the other modules that exist within contract management or the contract flow application?
That's actually a great question, and I think it leads to an important call out that there's a distinction between contract lifecycle management and contract obligation management. These are two unique products that Aavenir offers. We can bundle them together. Our enterprise contract lifecycle management solution includes obligation flow, but they are two distinctly different applications, leveraging the same data model, the same workflow engine, really the same platform, being ServiceNow. So there is contract flow for the execution, drafting, requesting, negotiating, signing of agreements. And then obligation management picks up as the natural next steps to manage the ongoing obligations and compliance for any particular agreement. So hopefully that addressed your question, Lithia.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Russell. Next question is from Suzanne. So when you have extracted the obligations from a contract, how do these get allocated to user for fulfillment?
Right. So
okay.
All right, Russell, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So as we saw in the demo, the obligations get put on an obligation board, which are then broken down by discrete tasks that are required to fulfill those obligations. The monthly SLA audit was the example that we viewed. The single obligation was broken down into 12 tasks, one monthly audit over the course of a 12-month contract term. Those tasks can then be assigned to individuals or business units. Anybody in the organization can be on the receiving end of one of these tasks. And it's leveraging core ServiceNow task management functionality to deliver those tasks to different folks. So that's really the process by which the tasks are allocated, and then reminders, alerts, notifications can then be automated from there to make sure that whoever is on the hook for these obligations is aware of them and can proactively address them in a timely fashion.
Okay, great. There's another question from Alethea is, do you have a webinar like this on contract flow?
We sure do. I invite everybody to go to the resources page on our website. We have got a handful of webinars covering contract management, accounts payable automation, obligation flow, which we've shared with you today, as well as a bunch of other valuable resources. So please swing by. Feel free to drop us an email as well. If you have any specific questions, we'd be happy to set up a personalized presentation for you also.
Great, great. The next question which we have is regarding, can I assign an obligation to a stakeholder from other business unit?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. So yep, anybody can be on the
So-
receiving end of tasks. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question is regarding the integration aspect. So does the obligation flow support integration with Now platform products such as vendor management or other products like ITAM or ITSM?
Yes, absolutely it does. In fact, I'll take that. And that's the biggest advantage you get, because Avenir products are built as a native application within ServiceNow. We are right inside ServiceNow. Like I said, you don't even need to log in separately to Avenir. You log into ServiceNow, you log into Avenir. And so we leverage a lot of ServiceNow capabilities. And when it comes to integrating with anything which is inside your ServiceNow, yes, absolutely, we can, directly pull out that information data from the underlying tables and give you that integrated, seamless experience.
Okay, okay, great. Thanks, Vikram. The next question is regarding the licensing. So what is the difference between contract flow and obligation flow? And do I need a license for both of the products?
Well, we've covered the difference, right? Contract flow, you can think about that as the contract execution engine, and obligation flow, you can think about that as the ongoing compliance management engine. You do not need a license to both products. Either of them can be purchased separately and stand alone from one another. However, our enterprise contract management bundle does include obligation flows. So they're certainly designed to be leveraged, or they can be leveraged together seamlessly, and they can be purchased that way as well, but you do not need one to have the other. They are standalone applications. Neither of them are requisite on the other one.
Okay, great. Thanks, Russell. And I think this is the last question. So if there are any more questions, yeah, this will be the right opportunity to type in your question. So the current question which I have is, how many actions can I create for each contract?
All right.
As many as you need.
If what do you mean by actions is tasks? I mean, you can. There's no restriction as such that we put on that. But however, so like I said, we have an artificial intelligence model that looks at the contract document and automatically extracts and identifies and categorizes every obligation. And then what the system does is it looks at those identified obligations and sees the frequency. Now, if it's a one-time or a monthly frequency, let's say an obligation is a monthly frequency, and the contract period is a 3-year contract, so it would actually automatically end up creating 36 tasks. But yeah, if you actually want to create some additional tasks and actions, you could do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vikram. Okay, so a couple of questions have really come in. So thank you everyone for sharing your questions. So this question is from Prashant, and he's sharing is, do you extract contract information from contract documents like PDF, images, and etc.? So what are the format of contract wherein the information is extracted from the AI?
So we extract contract obligations from Microsoft Word documents today.
Okay, yeah. So Microsoft Word is there, PDF is there, even images are there, even handwritten images are also there. Like
yes,
yeah. So those are the.
We do. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. So yeah. So the next question is, how are obligations automatically picked for extraction? Is there a specific method to differentiate between all the wills and shells in the contract?
So They're picked for extraction, leveraging technology called natural language processing. So the technology is able to infer based on the verbiage if an obligation is being outlined within that particular sentence or piece of language. That's the actual front end of the extraction process. And then our AI engine is also going to be leveraged to do kind of further assessment and scanning and give, degree of confidence in what's being presented. Of course, once the obligations are extracted and presented to you, you'll have an opportunity to go through and, read through them. And if there are things that you think need to be raised as a higher priority or maybe omitted, all of that can be done as well within the console.
Great, great. So thank you. I think, that's the end of the questions, and we are anyways over our time limit. So I would like to thank you, everyone. And, I would request you to, please to reach out to us wherein we can help you answer your questions. And also don't miss out to leverage our template library, contract library, and these apps and the ServiceNow App Store, wherein all the contract flow, AP automation, RFP management, there are various apps which are listed on the Now Store. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vikram, and thank you, Russell, for taking your time out and sharing about how to manage contractual obligations using AI on ServiceNow.